For 15 years, she built an empire by his side. For 8 months, he cheated on her with a gold-digging socialite. She had one night to show him who really called the shots. Edward Santana, the celebrity surgeon, thought he could trade his wife, Lucy, for a younger version without consequences. He introduced his mistress, Vera, as his new girlfriend in the same social circles he'd frequented with his wife for decades. But when Lucy showed up at the most important charity gala of the year, she in red Valentino, his mistress in a cheap animal print dress, the tables turned in a way no one expected. Some women, when they finally decide to stop pretending not to see the obvious, don't just become queens. They become absolute queens. And Edward was about to discover that the woman he'd underestimated for years had only been saving her claws for the right moment. Lucy watched from the window of her duplex apartment in Barra da Tijuca as the golden late-afternoon sun painted the sea in amber tones. At 40, she had a natural elegance that made people turn to admire her wherever she went. Her brown hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, framing a face that time had only refined, never aged. "Mommy, Daddy's here!" shouted Enzo, her 5-year-old son, running through the living room with his arms out like an airplane. The boy had his father's same intense green eyes, but his mother's sweet, genuine smile. Mateus, 10, looked up from his tablet and just nodded. The older boy had started to notice the tensions at home, the prolonged silences during dinners, his mother's forced smiles when Edward came home too late, smelling of a perfume that wasn't hers. Edward Santana, 45, was the most sought-after plastic surgeon in Rio de Janeiro. His clinic in the South Zone served the country's most famous celebrities, and his schedule was always full of procedures that cost more than many people earned in a year. Tall and dark-haired, with a smile that melted hearts, and a natural charm that opened every door, he had built an empire based on the vanity of others and his own exceptional skill. "Honey," Edward kissed Lucy's forehead distractedly, already checking messages on his phone. "I need to leave early today. I have an emergency surgery." It was the third emergency of the week. Lucy had stopped questioning him a long time ago. She knew Edward loved her in his own way, but she also knew he loved himself more, along with the adrenaline of always wanting more. More women, more adventures, more excitement than a stable marriage could offer. "Of course," she replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'll put your plate in the fridge." During dinner, Lucy watched her children. Enzo chattered about a drawing he'd made at school, showing a picture of the family where everyone was holding hands and smiling. Mateus remained quiet, occasionally casting questioning glances at his father's empty chair. "Where's Daddy?" Enzo asked for the 3rd time. "Working, my love. He's saving lives," Lucy answered, repeating the same lie she had told countless times. Mateus looked at her with an expression that seemed too old for his 10 years. "Mommy, why is Daddy always working when other dads are home?" Lucy's heart ached. She had grown up in a humble family in Niterói, the daughter of a hard-working mechanic and a seamstress who always found time for her and her siblings. She met Edward in college, where she was studying business administration, and he was in medical school. Back then, he was different. Ambitious, yes, but also caring and passionate. They married soon after his graduation, and Lucy gave up her own professional dreams to support him in building his medical career. She had been his first investor, using the small inheritance she received from her grandparents to help him set up his first office. She had been his secretary, his scheduler, his public relations. When the children were born, she became a dedicated mother while continuing to be the wife who organized his life, accompanied him to social events, and smiled for photos in gossip magazines as the perfect wife of the famous doctor. But somewhere along the way, Edward had forgotten who had been by his side from the beginning. The first betrayals began 3 years ago, discreet enough that she could pretend not to know. Text messages he hid on his phone, different perfumes, strange calls he took in his office. Lucy discovered the first time by accident when she found a hotel receipt in his jacket pocket. She confronted him that night, and Edward had cried, begged for forgiveness, and promised it would never happen again. He said it had been a moment of weakness, that he loved her, and that his family was the most important thing to him. She believed him because she wanted to. After 15 years together, after 2 children, after building an entire life with him, the alternative seemed impossible to face. But the betrayals continued, each one more blatant and less hidden than the last. Her friends began to whisper as she passed by at social events, the pitiful looks from the other doctors' wives, the muffled giggles when she arrived alone at a party, once again because Edward was working. Lucy knew she was being ridiculed, but with each confrontation, Edward managed to manipulate the situation. He was a master at making her feel paranoid, jealous, and overly dramatic. "Lucy, you're imagining things. You know how my schedule is. I work to give you guys the best," he would say, always ending with promises, declarations of love, and a few days of exemplary behavior before everything started all over again. That night, after putting the boys to bed, Lucy sat at her vanity and looked at herself in the mirror. She was still beautiful, still desirable. At 40, she had a body that many 20-year-olds envied, maintained through regular exercise, and a discipline that Edward never needed because she organized even his diet. She had sacrificed her own dreams, her own career, and her own identity to be the perfect wife. And what had she gotten in return? A husband who respected her so little that he didn't even bother to properly hide his affairs. Her phone vibrated with a message. It was her best friend, Carla. "Saw Edward at the Fazzano today, holding hands with a woman. Lucy, we need to talk." Lucy closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She knew this moment would come. The question was no longer whether he was cheating, but when she would have the courage to do something about it. She looked at their wedding photo on the vanity. 2 young, smiling people, full of dreams and promises. She barely recognized the woman in the picture, not physically, but spiritually. Where was that determined girl who had given up everything to support the man she loved? Where was the Lucy who had her own opinions, who dreamed of her own career, who didn't ask anyone's permission to be who she was? In the next room, she could hear Edward talking softly on the phone, probably arranging the next meeting, the next lie, the next humiliation. Lucy got up and walked to the window. The city stretched out before her, full of lights and possibilities. Somewhere out there was the woman she had been before she became just Dr. Edward's wife. It was time to start looking for her. The conversation with Carla was more painful than Lucy had expected. They met at a discreet cafe in Ipanema, away from the places frequented by Edward's social circle. Carla, a freelance journalist who had known Lucy since college, didn't try to sugarcoat the situation. "Lucy, she's not just an affair anymore. He's introducing her as his girlfriend," Carla said, holding her friend's hands. "The woman's name is Vera Montero. She's a socialite who recently divorced an oil tycoon. They went to the Marcelo Cohen Gallery's vernissage last week, the book launch for Marina Silva, and yesterday they were having lunch at the Fazzano, as if they were an official couple." Lucy felt her stomach churn. One thing was the one-night stands, the casual affairs she had learned to ignore for the sake of preserving her family. It was something else entirely for him to be building a public relationship, introducing another woman in the social circles they had frequented together for years. "There's more," Carla hesitated. "She posted a photo on Instagram last night. The 2 of them were at a party you were supposed to go to with him." Lucy remembered. It was Dr. Marcelo Ribeiro's birthday party, one of Edward's partners at the clinic. Edward had told her she had a headache and couldn't go. Lucy actually did have a headache, but she would have gone if he had pushed a little. Instead, he seemed relieved when she said she would stay home. "Show me," Lucy asked. Carla reluctantly handed over her phone. On the screen, a blonde woman in her mid-30s, clearly maintained by expensive surgeries and treatments, smiled next to Edward. She was wearing a navy blue dress that Lucy recognized. Edward had complimented a similar one in a Louis Vuitton window last week, saying it would look beautiful on her. Apparently, he had bought it for someone else. What hurt the most was seeing Edward in the photo. He was genuinely smiling, his eyes sparkling in a way Lucy hadn't seen directed at her in years. His hand was possessively on Vera's waist, and he was looking at her as if she were the most fascinating woman in the world. "Lucy, you need to protect yourself," Carla said softly. "Financially, legally. This isn't about saving the marriage anymore. This is about you not walking away from this empty-handed after everything you've done for him." Lucy knew Carla was right, but the reality still felt surreal. 15 years of marriage, 2 children, a life built brick by brick. How could someone just throw all that away? When she got home, Edward was in his office on the phone. She paused at the door and watched him. He was laughing at something the person on the other end of the line had said, an intimate, affectionate laugh. The same laugh he used to have when he talked to her in the early years of their marriage. "No, I can't tonight. I have family commitments," he was saying. "But we'll see each other tomorrow. I love you too." "I love you too." The words hit Lucy like a punch to the stomach. When was the last time Edward had said that to her? She couldn't even remember. Edward hung up and turned around, startling when he saw her at the door. For a fraction of a second, she saw guilt in his eyes, but he quickly composed himself. "Hey, honey, I was just talking to Dr. Mendez about tomorrow's case." He lied without a second thought. Lucy stared at him for a long moment. "Edward, we need to talk." Sure, but I can't now. I have a conference call with Sao Paulo in 5 minutes. How about after dinner?" Another stall, another excuse. Lucy nodded and left the office. She knew that conversation would never happen. Edward had become a master at avoiding confrontations, at always having something more urgent to do when she tried to address their relationship problems. That night, during dinner, Lucy watched her husband interact with their children. Edward was still a caring father when he was present. He helped Enzo with his math homework, talked to Mateus about soccer, and made jokes that made the boys laugh. It was in these moments that Lucy's resolve would falter. How could she destroy this family dynamic because of her own pain? But when Edward said he needed to leave early because of a hospital emergency, and she saw Vera post a photo on Instagram at the exact moment he left the house, a picture at a Japanese restaurant in Ipanema, Lucy knew she had reached her limit. She put the boys to bed and locked herself in the bathroom. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw a tired woman, a woman who had spent too many years pretending not to see the obvious. Her eyes, once bright with life and determination, now seemed dull and resigned. Lucy took out her phone and called her younger sister, Marina, who lived in Sao Paulo and worked as a lawyer. "Marina, I need help," she said, as soon as her sister answered. "Lucy, what happened? Are you okay?" "No, I'm not okay, and I need a lawyer. A good divorce lawyer." There was silence on the other end of the line. Marina had always been suspicious of Edward, always felt he didn't deserve Lucy, but she had never said it directly. "Lucy, are you sure?" "I'm sure I can't live like this anymore. I'm sure my children deserve to see their mother being respected. I'm sure I deserve more than this." "Okay, I'll recommend the best family lawyer I know. He's discreet, efficient, and will protect your interests. But Lucy, you need to start documenting everything. Photos, conversations, bank statements, anything that proves the assets you built together." After hanging up, Lucy felt lighter than she had in years. For the first time in a long time, she was making an active decision about her own life, instead of just reacting to Edward's decisions. She spent the rest of the night organizing documents, making copies of bank statements, and taking pictures of valuable assets in the house. With each document she found, she discovered investments Edward had made without consulting her, accounts he kept on his own, and excessive expenses she hadn't even known existed. When Edward came home at 2 in the morning, smelling of Vera's perfume, Lucy was in bed pretending to be asleep. He took a long shower, probably to get rid of any evidence, and lay down on the other side of the bed as if nothing had happened. Lucy stayed awake the rest of the night, planning her next steps. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking only of her children or Edward. She was thinking about herself, the woman she had been, the woman she could be again. The dawn brought crystal clarity. Lucy was no longer going to accept crumbs of attention. She was no longer going to pretend not to see the obvious. She was no longer going to sacrifice her dignity for the sake of a domestic peace that, in reality, was just a well-disguised lie. It was time to take back her life. The meeting with the lawyer was a dose of reality that Lucy had not expected. Dr. Roberto Mendez, recommended by Marina as the best family law attorney in Rio, was a serious, direct man who didn't waste time with pleasantries. Mrs. Santana, based on what you've told me and the documents you've brought, you have a considerable estate. The clinic, the properties, the investments. You are entitled to 50% of everything that was built during the marriage. And considering you gave up your career to support his, there's also the issue of alimony. Lucy knew they had money, but she had never stopped to calculate exactly how much. Edward had always controlled the finances, giving her a generous allowance for personal and household expenses, but keeping her away from the big financial decisions. There's one thing I need to warn you about, the lawyer continued. If your husband is maintaining a public relationship with another woman and spending marital money on her, this can be characterized as asset dissipation. We need to act quickly to protect your assets. This information was like a slap in the face. It wasn't enough that Edward was emotionally cheating. He was literally spending the money she had helped build on his mistress. What do I need to do? First, open a bank account of your own. Second, start transferring half the money from the joint accounts. Third, make a complete inventory of all assets. Fourth, if possible, get evidence of the betrayals and expenses with the other woman. Lucy left the lawyer's office with a to-do list and a strange sense of power. For the first time in years, she was making practical, concrete decisions about her own life. Her first stop was the bank. Lucy discovered they had much more money than she had imagined. Checking accounts, investments, savings. The empire Edward had built was impressive, and she was legally entitled to half of it. When the manager suggested she talk to Edward before making any moves, Lucy interrupted him with a firmness she didn't know she possessed. I don't need my husband's authorization to move money that is also mine. Please proceed with the transfers I requested. The manager, a little taken aback by her determination, processed the transfers without further question. Within an hour, Lucy had a substantial bank account of her own, for the first time in 15 years. The following days were filled with intense preparation. Lucy hired a private investigator recommended by the lawyer, a discreet man named Carlos, who specialized in infidelity cases. She needed solid evidence, not just rumors and Instagram photos. Mrs. Santana, in 3 days I'll have a complete report for you. Places they frequent, times, expenses, everything documented, Carlos assured her. Meanwhile, Lucy began to rebuild her network. She called old college friends and reconnected with professional contacts she had abandoned when she became just a wife and mother. She discovered that a university friend, Beatrice, had started a business consulting firm and needed someone with administrative experience. Lucy, you were always the most organized in our class, And with your experience managing Edward's career, you have skills that many companies need, Beatrice said during a lunch. When you're ready to get back into the workforce, we have a position waiting for you. For the first time in years, Lucy imagined having her own career, earning her own money, and being recognized for her competence, and not just for being the wife of someone famous. At home, she maintained her normal routine with the boys, but Edward began to notice that something was different. Lucy stopped asking where he was going, stopped staying up late, waiting for him to come home, and stopped having those tense arguments that always ended with him managing to turn the tables and make her feel guilty. "You're acting strange," he commented one morning while having coffee. "Strange how?" Lucy asked, keeping her voice neutral. "I don't know. Different, more distant?" Lucy almost laughed. He was complaining about her being distant when he spent more time with his mistress than at home. But she just smiled and said, "Maybe I'm finally learning to worry less about things that are out of my control." Edward looked at her with curiosity, but didn't press the issue. He was too busy with his own games to realize that Lucy had stopped playing. The investigator's report arrived on a Friday and was even more shocking than Lucy had expected. Edward and Vera had been together for 8 months, much longer than Lucy had imagined. They had an apartment he rented in her name in Copacabana, where they met regularly. Edward had bought Vera a car, a convertible BMW that cost 200,000 reais. They had traveled together to Buenos Aires last month, when he had told Lucy he was at a medical conference. What hurt the most were the photos. Edward and Vera in intimate situations, at romantic restaurants, walking hand in hand on the beach. In all the pictures, Edward looked happier and more relaxed than Lucy had seen him at home in years. But what really made her furious was discovering that Edward had taken Vera to meet some of their friends, introducing her as his special friend. People who greeted Lucy with fake kisses at parties already knew and approved of her replacement. That weekend, Edward went out on Saturday, saying he was going to play tennis with friends. Lucy knew from the report that he was going to meet Vera for an afternoon at the Copacabana apartment. Instead of staying home to stew, she called a babysitter for the boys and went out. She went to a hair salon in Barra, where she got a modern haircut, painted her nails a vibrant red, and got a more striking makeup look than she usually wore. Then she went shopping, buying clothes that accentuated her beauty instead of the conservative outfits Edward always said he preferred. When he got home at the end of the day, Lucy was in the living room watching a movie with the boys. She was wearing a new dress, low-cut enough to be elegant but provocative, and her hair fell in sensual waves over her shoulders. Edward stopped at the living room door and looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Was it surprise? Admiration? Maybe even a little desire? Something she hadn't seen in his eyes in a long time. "You look beautiful," he said, and for the first time in months, he seemed sincere. "Thank you," Lucy answered simply, without the grateful smile she used to give when he complimented her. That night, Edward tried to approach her in bed, touching her arm softly. Lucy naturally moved away. "I'm tired," she said without drama or accusation, just a fact. Edward was silent for a moment. "Lucy, is everything okay between us?" She turned to look at him. "Why wouldn't it be? I don't know. You seem different lately." Lucy smiled in the darkness. "Maybe I'm just finally growing up, Edward. It happens to everyone sooner or later." He didn't reply, but Lucy knew she had planted a seed of unease in his mind. Men like Edward like to have control over all the pieces of the game. When one of the pieces started to move independently, they became nervous, and Lucy was just beginning to move. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a messenger on elegant embossed paper. Santa Cruz Hospital Charity Gala, a night in support of the new pediatric wing. The date was 2 weeks away, and Lucy knew it would be the social event of the year. All the city's renowned doctors would be there, along with their wives and the karaoke elite. Edward came home that night visibly agitated. He walked into the room where Lucy was reading, holding the invitation in his hands. "Lucy, about the Santa Cruz Gala," he began hesitantly. "Yes, I received the invitation. It's going to be a beautiful event," she replied without looking up from her book. "It's just, well, this year it's going to be different. I have a lot of professional commitments at the party. I'll need to move around a lot." Lucy finally looked at him. "And? Maybe it's better if you don't go. I know you don't really like those long parties. And with the kids. Ah." So that was it. Edward wanted to take Vera to the most important event on the medical social calendar, but he couldn't officially appear with his mistress while he was still married. The solution he found was to simply get rid of his wife. "Edward," Lucy said calmly, closing her book, "I'm going to the gala. In fact, I've already bought my dress." This was a lie, but she saw panic cross his eyes. "Lucy, be reasonable. It's going to be a night of work for me, not fun. You'll be bored. Don't worry about me. I know how to behave at social events. After all, I've been doing it by your side for 15 years. Edward tried a few more arguments, but Lucy was unyielding. She was going to the gala. Period. When he left the room, she heard him talking on the phone in his office, clearly trying to solve the problem she had become. In the following days, Lucy prepared for the gala as if it were a battle, because, in a way, it was exactly that. She chose a red Valentino dress that cost a small fortune, but made her look like a goddess. The neckline was elegant yet striking. The color highlighted her skin, and the cut accentuated her curves flawlessly. Carlos, the investigator, informed her that Vera had bought a dress with a leopard print at a boutique in Ipanema. "She'll be there, ma'am. Your husband got her an invitation through Dr. Marcello." Lucy smiled. "Perfect. Let the games begin." On the morning of the gala, Lucy spent the day at the spa. A massage, a facial, a manicure, and a pedicure. She wanted to be absolutely radiant. Then she went to the hairdresser, where she got a sophisticated updo that exposed her neck, highlighting the delicate white gold diamond necklace she would wear. A piece of jewelry Edward had given her for their 10th wedding anniversary, back when he still pretended to care about special dates. Edward left the house before her, claiming he needed to get there early to handle technical matters. Lucy knew he wanted time to meet Vera and coordinate how they would act during the party. When Lucy arrived at the Copacabana Palace, where the event was being held, she caused a stir. Several people who had known her for years went out of their way to compliment her, commenting on how stunning she looked. She greeted everyone with grace and elegance, talking about her children, complimenting the other women's dresses, being the perfect society lady she had always been. That's when she saw her. Vera was in the center of a group of people, laughing too loudly and gesturing in an exaggerated way. The leopard print dress was flashy, but in a way that screamed new money trying to impress. She was beautiful, Lucy had to admit, but there was a certain desperation in her demeanor, as if she were constantly trying to prove she belonged there. Edward was by her side, introducing her to people Lucy had known for years. She could see his uncomfortable expression when he realized Lucy had arrived. Lucy grabbed a glass of champagne and positioned herself strategically near the group. She didn't go directly to confront them. That would be tacky. Instead, she simply began talking to Dr. Mariana, a cardiologist she had known since Edward was a resident. "Lucy, what a surprise to see you here. I thought you weren't coming," Dr. Mariana said, clearly unaware of the delicate situation. "Why wouldn't I come? I love these charity events, and Edward always needs support on important nights," Lucy replied with a smile, speaking loudly enough to be heard by the group next to her. Edward heard her and turned around. For a second, he looked like a teenager caught doing something forbidden. Vera also looked over, assessing Lucy from head to toe with calculating eyes. "Edward! Lucy called sweetly. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your friend?" The silence that followed was deafening. All conversations around them stopped. Edward was pale, Vera was flushed, and about 20 people were looking on, waiting to see how the situation would play out. "Lucy, Edward stammered. "Hi?" Vera stepped forward, extending her hand with a forced smile. "I'm Vera, Edward's friend." Lucy shook her hand firmly, maintaining eye contact. "Lucy, Edward's wife of 15 years. The introduction landed like a bomb on the group. Vera tried to hide her embarrassment, but Lucy could see the desperation in her eyes. Edward looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. "What a lovely dress you have," Lucy continued, examining Vera from head to toe. "Animal print is a brave choice." Lucy's seemingly innocent tone carried enough venom to kill an elephant. Some of the women in the group stifled giggles, perfectly understanding the double meaning. "Thank you," Vera replied, trying to maintain her composure. "Yours is very classic, too." "Valentino," Lucy said simply. "I bought it especially for tonight. Edward always says red is my color." She looked directly at her husband as she said this. Dr. Marcello, sensing the tension in the air, tried to break the ice. "Lucy, you're radiant. How are the kids?" "They're great, thank you. Mateus is excelling at soccer, and Enzo is learning piano. Edward is a wonderful father when he gets some time off from surgeries." Every word was carefully chosen. Every pause was calculated. Lucy was completely dominating the situation, making it clear to everyone present exactly who the legitimate wife was and who the intruder was. Vera, realizing she was losing the battle, tried a counteroffensive. "Edward told me you don't work. It must be wonderful to have so much free time." Lucy smiled. It was the exact opening she had been waiting for. "You're right. I don't work a job outside the home. I've spent the last 15 years investing in my husband's success. I was the one who financed his first office, who organized his schedule in the early years, who took care of all the personal aspects so he could focus on his career. It's fascinating how some people confuse strategic investment with idleness." The entire group was now completely focused on the conversation. It was better than a TV drama. "Dr." Marcello tried again to change the subject, but Lucy wasn't finished. "But you're right about one thing. Now, I have a lot of free time, so much so that I'm going back to work. I received a very interesting offer from a consulting firm. It's going to be exciting to have my own career again." Edward looked at her with genuine surprise. This was the first time he had heard about Lucy's professional plans. "What kind of consulting?" Dr. Mariana asked, genuinely interested. "Strategic management for professionals. Doctors, lawyers, architects, people who are excellent at what they do technically, but need help with the administrative and marketing aspects. It's incredible how some talented professionals can be so naive when it comes to managing their personal careers." Once again, the comment had a double meaning. Lucy was making it clear that Edward owed his success in part to her management. Vera was visibly uncomfortable. She had expected to find a submissive, insecure wife, not an elegant, intelligent woman who was clearly in control of the situation. "Well," Edward said finally, "I think we should circulate a little. Lucy, do you mind if I introduce Vera to some colleagues?" "Of course not," Lucy replied gracefully. "After all, it's important for your friends to meet the right people." Edward quickly led Vera away, but Lucy could see them talking intensely a few feet away. Vera was gesturing nervously, clearly upset about how things had gone. "Lucy," Dr. Mariana approached when they were alone. "Are you okay? This must be difficult." Lucy smiled genuinely for the first time that night. "You know, Mariana, I'm better than I've been in years. Sometimes we need to be reminded of who we really are." The rest of the night was a lesson in class and elegance. Lucy moved through the event, greeting people she hadn't talked to properly in years, rediscovering connections she had neglected while dedicating herself exclusively to the role of a wife. She talked about art with a gallery owner, about education with a private school principal, about investments with a financial consultant. With each conversation, she rediscovered aspects of herself that she had buried. Her intelligence, her ability to argue, her natural charm that had nothing to do with being the wife of someone famous. Edward and Vera, on the other hand, seemed increasingly out of place. Vera tried to compensate for the initial embarrassment by being even more expansive, laughing too loudly, touching Edward too much, and making comments that showed her lack of genuine sophistication. Around 11 o'clock, Lucy decided she had made her point. She approached Edward, who was talking to a group of surgeons. "Edward, dear, I need to go. I promised the babysitter I'd be back before midnight." He looked at her with a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Do you want me to go with you?" "No, that's okay. I know how important these events are for your networking. Feel free to enjoy the party." Lucy said goodbye gracefully to everyone, including Vera, giving social air kisses as if nothing had happened. But when she leaned in close to Vera's ear to say goodbye, she whispered softly, "Good luck." They were just 2 words, but the tone carried all the confidence of a woman who knew exactly who she was and what she was worth. Lucy left the Copacabana Palace with her head held high, greeting acquaintances on the way. At the valet, while waiting for her car, she received several text messages. Friends, complimenting how beautiful she looked, professional contacts interested in discussing opportunities, even a few single men who had asked her friends for her number. When she finally got in the car, Lucy looked at herself in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at her was someone she had forgotten existed. A powerful, elegant, intelligent woman who, for the first time in years, was completely in control of her own story. Edward got home at 3 in the morning, clearly disturbed. Lucy pretended to be asleep, but she heard him walking around the house restless. She knew that the night had changed everything. Edward had realized he was no longer dealing with a submissive, predictable wife. He was dealing with a worthy adversary, and the game had just begun. The days after the gala were filled with a palpable tension in the Santana household. Edward was clearly shaken by what had happened at the event, but he didn't know how to approach Lucy. She, in turn, maintained a serenity that bordered on unsettling. There were no arguments, accusations, or tears, just a calm that made Edward more and more nervous. Lucy continued her normal routine with the children, but there was a lightness in her step that hadn't been there in years. She hummed as she made breakfast, smiled genuinely when Enzo told her about a school mischief, and talked to Mateus about his dreams and fears with a presence that had been absent for a long time. "Mommy, you're different," Mateus commented one Saturday morning while they were having breakfast together. "Different how?" Lucy asked, pouring more juice for her son. "Happier, even when Daddy's not here." The 10-year-old's observation was like a stab in Lucy's heart. Her children had noticed that she could only be genuinely happy in their father's absence, and that was more painful than any betrayal. "Sometimes, my love, people need to remember who they really are, and when that happens, they get happier." That afternoon, while Edward was at work, Lucy knew from the investigator that he was trying to calm down Vera, who had become hysterical after the humiliation at the gala. She received an unexpected visit. Dr. Marcelo Ribeiro, Edward's partner at the clinic, was at her door with a serious expression. "Lucy, can we talk?" She invited him in and served him coffee in the living room. Dr. Marcelo was a man of integrity who had always treated Lucy with genuine respect. "Lucy, I know it's none of my business, but Edward has been my partner for 10 years. What happened at the gala? Well, people are talking." "And what are they saying?" Lucy asked calmly. "That you publicly humiliated that woman. That it was a display of class against, well, against someone who clearly doesn't have any." Lucy smiled. "Dr. Marcelo, I simply introduced myself as Edward's wife. If that was humiliating for someone, maybe that person should rethink their position." "Lucy, Edward is making a monumental mistake. We all know that. That woman, she's a gold digger. She's clearly after his money, and he's too blind to see it. Why are you telling me this? Dr. Marcello sighed. Because you're the best thing that ever happened to Edward. Because your children need their parents together, and because, frankly, the clinic's reputation is starting to be affected by this situation. Lucy looked at him for a long moment. Dr. Marcello, I appreciate your concern, but my marriage ended the moment Edward decided to introduce another woman as his companion. All that's left is for me to decide how to deal with it. And how are you going to deal with it? With dignity, with intelligence, and by protecting my children and my rights. When Dr. Marcello left, Lucy knew the conversation would reach Edward's ears quickly. And it did. He came home that night visibly agitated. Lucy, we need to talk, now. She finished helping Enzo with his homework and went up to the bedroom with Edward. Marcello was here today, he began, closing the door. Yes, he was worried about you. Lucy, what do you want? Money? You can have half of everything. But you can't keep publicly humiliating me. Lucy sat in the armchair and looked at him. Edward, do you think this is about money, isn't it? No. This is about respect. This is about 15 years of my life that I dedicated to you. This is about having raised 2 children practically on my own while you built your career. This is about having sacrificed my own dreams to support yours. Edward approached, trying a more conciliatory tone. Lucy, I know I made mistakes, but we can get past this. We can go to therapy, start over. Start over? Lucy laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Edward, you introduced your mistress as your girlfriend to our friends. You spent our money to support another woman. You systematically humiliated me for months, and now you want to start over? It was a moment of weakness. I was confused. 8 months of confusion, Edward? A rented apartment is confusion? A 200,000 race car is confusion? Edward paled. How do I know all this? Because, unlike you, I still have some intelligence. Did you really think you could live a second life without me finding out? Edward sat on the bed, running his hands through his hair. Lucy, I can explain. You don't need to explain. I understand perfectly. You fell in love with the feeling of being the powerful man, conquering a younger woman again. You liked being the generous provider, the mysterious and successful man. With her, you weren't just an overwhelmed husband and father with responsibilities. You were the passionate lover. The precision of Lucy's analysis left Edward speechless. The problem, Edward, is that you forgot that the image you sold to her was built by both of us. The money you spend on her is the result of a partnership, our marital partnership. The success that impresses her was built with my support, my dedication, my sacrifice. Lucy got up and walked to the window. You know what's saddest? You could have had both. You could have told me you were feeling bored, that you wanted more romance in our marriage. We could have worked together to rekindle the passion, but you chose the cowardice of betrayal over the courage of honesty. Lucy! Edward tried to get closer, but she raised her hand to stop him. No. Now you're going to listen to me. Monday morning, you will receive the divorce papers. I want half of everything. The clinic, the properties, the investments. I want alimony and shared custody of the boys. And I want you out of this house by the end of the month. Lucy, be reasonable. I am being more reasonable than you deserve. I could have done this in a scandalous way, involving the press and destroying your reputation. Instead, I'm offering a civilized divorce. And what if I don't agree? Lucy smiled, and there was something dangerous in that smile. Edward, do you really want to find out how far I can go when I stop being understanding? That night, Edward slept in the guest room. Lucy stayed awake planning the next steps. On Monday, in addition to the divorce papers, she would file a lawsuit for the partial dissolution of the clinic's partnership. Dr. Marcello had inadvertently given her the information she needed. As an undeclared but contributing partner to the initial investments in the clinic, she had rights that Edward hadn't even imagined. On Tuesday, Lucy officially started at Beatrice's consulting firm. Her first client was, ironically, a dermatologist who was having problems managing the finances of her expanding clinic. "It's impressive," Beatrice commented after Lucy's first week on the job. "You have a natural talent for this. Dr. Paula already said you saved her business." Lucy was rediscovering her professional competence, her ability to make strategic decisions, and her skill in dealing with people. These were qualities she had used for years to support Edward's career, but which she was now channeling to build her own professional identity. At home, she explained the situation to the boys, honestly, but in an age-appropriate way. "Daddy and Mommy are going to live in separate houses," she said, sitting between them on the couch. "That doesn't mean he loves you less, or that I love you less. It just means that we, as adults, need different arrangements to be happy." Matthias, the older one, asked direct questions. "Was it because of the woman at the party?" Lucy took a deep breath. "It was because of a lot of things, my love. But the important thing is that you will always have the love of both of your parents, no matter where each of us lives." Enzo, the younger one, was mainly concerned with practical matters. "Will I be able to take my toys to Daddy's house?" "Of course you can, my love." Edward tried several strategies in the following weeks. First emotional blackmail, then legal threats, then promises to change. Nothing worked. Lucy had transformed into an unassailable fortress. The final turning point came when Vera showed up at the house 3 weeks after the gala. It was a Saturday afternoon. Edward had gone out with the boys, and Lucy was at home organizing papers when the doorbell rang. Vera was clearly desperate. Without the careful makeup and expensive dresses, she looked like an ordinary middle-aged woman fighting against time. "I need to talk to you," she said when Lucy opened the door. Lucy invited her in, curious to see what her husband's mistress had to say. "Edward broke up with me," Vera said flatly. "He said he wants to try to save the marriage." Lucy served them water and sat down calmly. "And what does that have to do with me? You need to take him back. You have children, a life together." "Vera," Lucy interrupted. "You spent 8 months sleeping with my husband, spending my money, being introduced as his replacement in the social circles we've been in for 15 years. And now you come to my house to ask me to take him back? I know it was wrong, but it wasn't just wrong. It was pathetic. You're a 40-year-old woman, acting like a lovesick teenager over a married man. And now that he's tired of the game, you come running to me to fix the mess you made." Vera started to cry. "I thought he really loved me." Lucy looked at her with a mixture of pity and impatience. "Vera, men like Edward don't leave wives for mistresses. They use mistresses to feel young and powerful again. But when reality hits, they always go back to the security of what they already know. You were just an expensive diversion. So you're going to forgive him?" Lucy got up. "No, because unlike you, I have enough self-respect not to accept crumbs of attention from a man who clearly doesn't value me." After Vera left, Lucy felt strangely at peace. It was as if the last piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. Edward had broken up with his mistress not out of love for his wife, but out of fear of the consequences of divorce. And Lucy finally had absolute certainty that she was making the right decision. 6 months later, Lucy was in her new apartment in Lagoa, a modern and elegant space that she had chosen and decorated herself. The boys had adapted well to the new routine, spending half the week with each parent. Edward had tried to reconcile several times, but Lucy stood firm. She had discovered that she was happier alone than she had been in the last years of her marriage. At the consulting firm, Lucy quickly became the most sought-after partner. Her ability to understand the complex dynamics of business, combined with a sharp intuition about human behavior, made her exceptional at solving problems that seemed impossible. One night, while working at home preparing a presentation for a new client, Lucy received a call from Dr. Marcello. "Lucy, I have a proposal for you." "I'm listening." I want you to be the executive administrator of the clinic. Edward has agreed to step away from administrative matters and focus only on medical procedures. We need someone with your strategic vision." Lucy smiled. The irony of the situation was delicious. Edward had lost his wife, but now he would have to work under her management. "Dr. Marcello, I'll consider your proposal, but if I accept, it will be on my terms. Full autonomy for all administrative and financial decisions. Of course, you'd be saving our clinic, Lucy, and we all know it." When she hung up, Lucy looked at herself in the living room mirror. The woman looking back at her was powerful, independent, and fulfilled. There were some wrinkles around her eyes that hadn't been there 2 years ago, but they spoke of experience, of battles won, of wisdom gained. Her children were happy and secure. Her career was flourishing. Her financial life was solid. And for the first time in 15 years, she didn't depend on anyone to feel complete. Edward had tried to replace her with a younger, less questioning version. Instead, he had lost the only woman who truly knew and loved him. And now, he watched from afar as Lucy became more successful and happier than she had ever been during their marriage. That night, Lucy opened a bottle of champagne to celebrate. She wasn't celebrating the end of her marriage. That had been too painful to celebrate. She was celebrating the rebirth of Lucy Santana, the woman who had lost her way and had finally found her way back home. Back home to herself. Because sometimes, when a man tries to humiliate you by bringing his replacement into your world, the best revenge isn't to stoop to his level. It's to show that you don't just belong in that world. You can completely dominate it. And when that happens, you don't just become a queen. You become an absolute queen. 2 years later, the morning sun streamed through the large windows of Lucy's office on the top floor of the most modern commercial building in Barra da Tijuca. At 42, she had built an empire of her own that rivaled anything Edward had ever dreamed of achieving. Santana Strategic Consulting had become the most sought-after firm for professionals throughout Rio de Janeiro. And Lucy was regularly invited to speak at national conferences on business management. She was reviewing the third-quarter financial report when her secretary, Juliana, knocked on the door. "Mrs. Santana, Dr. Edward is here. He says it's about clinic matters." Lucy sighed softly. It had been 6 months since she had officially taken over as the clinic's executive administrator, and meetings between them were always tense. Not because of anger. Lucy had moved past that a long time ago, but because Edward was still clearly struggling to accept his new reality. "You can send him in." Edward entered the office, trying to maintain a professional demeanor, but Lucy could see the tension in his shoulders. He was thinner. There were gray hairs at his temples, and his eyes no longer had that arrogant spark from 2 years ago. Vera had lasted only 3 months after the divorce, and since then, Edward had had a series of superficial relationships that never lasted more than a few weeks. "Lucy," he greeted formally, sitting in the chair across from her desk. "Edward, what can I do for you?" "It's about the new protocols you've implemented at the clinic. Some of the doctors are complaining." Lucy raised her hand to interrupt him. "Edward, the protocols increased our efficiency by 30% and our profit margin by 40%. If some doctors are complaining about having to follow basic quality procedures and schedules, maybe they aren't the right professionals for our team." "Our team," Edward repeated with a slightly bitter tone. "Yes, our team. Or have you forgotten that I'm the majority shareholder of the clinic now?" This was the most ironic part of the whole situation. During the divorce process, Lucy had managed to prove that her initial investments in Edward's career, combined with years of unpaid work as an informal administrative manager, entitled her not only to half of the assets, but to 51% of the clinic. Edward managed the medical side, but Lucy controlled all the strategic and financial decisions. Lucy, I know we made mistakes. We didn't make any mistakes, Edward. You made mistakes. I just paid the price for them for too many years. Edward shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I was thinking maybe we could have dinner sometime. Talk about things other than work. Lucy looked at him with genuine curiosity. Edward, what exactly are you suggesting? That maybe we could try again. We're more mature now. We know more about ourselves. Lucy leaned back in her chair and crossed her legs. She was wearing a gray Armani suit that cost more than many people earned in a month, and she knew she looked absolutely stunning. Her financial independence had allowed her to invest in herself in a way she never had when she was just Dr. Edward's wife. Edward, do you really think I would go through what I went through just to end up back in the same place? But it wouldn't be the same place. I've changed. You've changed. Lucy laughed, but there was no cruelty in the sound. Edward, you've had 4 different relationships in the last year. The last one was with a 25-year-old nurse from the clinic itself, causing a scandal that I had to manage to protect our professional reputation. Edward blushed. That was just you being exactly who you've always been. The difference is that now I'm no longer the woman who accepts it silently. Lucy got up and walked to the window, looking at the city view that stretched out before her. You know, Edward, I thank you. You thank me? Yes. Your betrayals forced me to rediscover who I really was. If you had never humiliated me like that, I might have spent the rest of my life being just a diminished version of myself. She turned to face him. Today, I'm the CEO of my own company, the majority shareholder of our clinic, a present mother to our children, and a woman who doesn't need anyone's validation to feel complete. Do you think I'd trade that to go back to being the wife who pretended not to see your lies for years? Edward was silent for a long moment. Lucy, I still love you. No, Edward! You miss controlling me. You miss having an intelligent woman organize your life while you played at being the irresistible conqueror. But true love requires respect, and you never truly respected me. Lucy's phone rang, interrupting the conversation. It was Matthias, now 12, calling from school. Mom, can you come to the science presentation this afternoon? Of course, my love. I wouldn't miss it for the world. What about Dad? Lucy looked at Edward, who nodded, indicating he would also be there. He'll be there too. Cool. Are we going to have dinner together afterward? It was a question Matthias asked occasionally. The eternal hope of children that their parents would be a family again. Lucy always answered with gentle honesty. No, honey, but you'll have dinner with Dad, and then come home with me. Remember, tomorrow is our movie night. Okay, Mom, love you. I love you too, my love. When she hung up, Edward was watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. You're an amazing mother, he said softly. I always have been. The difference is that now I don't have to be just that. Edward got up to leave, but stopped at the door. Lucy, are you seeing anyone? Lucy smiled. That question always came eventually. Edward, my personal life is no longer your business, just as yours isn't mine. In fact, Lucy had gone out a few times with interesting men in recent months. An international lawyer she had met at a conference, a tech entrepreneur who had become a client of her consulting firm, and even a plastic artist she had met at an art opening. But she was at a stage in her life where she was learning to be happy with herself, with no rush to commit again. But if I were, she added with a playful smile, it would be with someone who values me from the very first date. After Edward left, Lucy went back to her desk and continued working. She had a meeting with investors in an hour. She was considering expanding the consulting firm to Sao Paulo. And then there was Matthias's presentation at school. Juliana brought in her afternoon coffee and some documents to sign. Mrs. Santana, an invitation arrived for the Santa Cruz Hospital Charity Gala. It's in 2 weeks. Lucy picked up the elegant invitation and smiled. It was the same event where, 2 years ago, she had confronted Vera and begun her journey back to herself. Confirm my attendance, she said, and reserve a table for 10 people. I'll invite some important clients. Are you going alone? Lucy considered the question. Ricardo, the international lawyer, had mentioned that he would be in Rio on those dates. He was intelligent, successful, and had the kind of genuine sophistication that didn't need external validation. More importantly, he treated her as an equal. He respected her intelligence and her independence. Actually, I'm going to make an invitation. That afternoon, at the boys' school, Lucy sat next to Edward at Mateus's science presentation. The boy had made a project about renewable energy that was impressively sophisticated for his age. During the presentation, she noticed other parents looking at them with curiosity. The famous divorced couple who maintained a civilized relationship for their children. He inherited your intelligence, Edward commented quietly. And your determination, Lucy replied, watching Mateus passionately explain his project to the judges. After school, while Edward took the boys to dinner, Lucy returned to her apartment in Lagoa. The space she had created for herself was a perfect reflection of who she had become. Elegant without being ostentatious, comfortable without being sloppy, sophisticated without being cold. She poured herself a glass of wine and went out to the balcony, watching the sunset paint the lagoon in golden hues. Her phone vibrated with a message from Ricardo. Just got to Rio. Free for dinner tomorrow? Lucy smiled and typed. Yes, yeah, I know a perfect place. In fact, she knew several perfect places. Restaurants she had discovered on her own, experiences she had lived for her own sake, a life she had built brick by brick, without depending on anyone. 2 weeks later, Lucy arrived at the Santa Cruz Hospital Charity Gala in a navy blue Elie Saab dress that made her look like a modern goddess. Ricardo was by her side, elegant in his tuxedo, talking easily with the other guests in fluent Portuguese with a charming foreign accent. Lucy's table was full of clients, business partners, and friends, people who respected her professional competence and admired her personal journey. She moved through the event, greeting acquaintances, introducing Ricardo, and discussing business opportunities. That's when she saw her. Vera was on the other side of the room, looking visibly older and more tired, talking animatedly with a gray-haired gentleman, whom Lucy recognized as a recently divorced businessman. She was wearing a dress that clearly tried to be elegant, but screamed too much effort. When their eyes met, Vera hesitated for a moment, as if considering whether to approach. Lucy simply nodded politely and continued her conversation with the director of a large private hospital, who was interested in hiring her services. Later, Edward arrived alone, greeting acquaintances, but clearly uncomfortable. He looked in the direction of Lucy's table several times, watching her laugh genuinely at Ricardo's jokes, and seeing how she naturally commanded the attention of the people around her. During the charity speech, Lucy was invited to the stage as one of the main contributors to the new pediatric wing. When she went on stage to speak, there was a respectful silence in the hall. 2 years ago, she began, her clear, confident voice echoing through the microphone. I was just the wife of a famous doctor. Today, I'm the CEO of my own company. I employ 40 people, and I contribute to our community not just with donations, but with concrete results. She looked out at the audience, her gaze briefly passing over Edward and then Vera. Sometimes, life's greatest challenges force us to discover strengths we didn't even know we possessed. And when that happens, we don't just survive, we thrive. The applause was deafening. Lucy came down from the stage and was immediately surrounded by people wanting to congratulate her, make partnerships, and invite her to other events. At the end of the night, as she and Ricardo were leaving, Edward intercepted her in the lobby. Lucy, can I talk to you for a minute? Ricardo discreetly moved a few steps away, giving them privacy. You were magnificent up there, Edward said, and there was something broken in his voice. Thank you. I made the biggest mistake of my life losing you. Lucy looked at him with genuine compassion. Edward, you didn't lose me. You freed me. And in the process, you freed yourself too. Now, we can both be who we really are, without the ties of a marriage that had stopped working a long time ago. But the boys? The boys have two parents who love them and who are learning to be better people separately. That's much healthier than growing up seeing an unhappy mother pretending everything is okay. Edward nodded slowly. You are an extraordinary woman, Lucy. You always have been. I just took too long to realize it. And I took too long to realize I didn't need your recognition to know my own worth. They parted amicably, Edward heading to his car alone, Lucy walking arm in arm with Ricardo to his. Difficult conversation? Ricardo asked, gently. Not really, it was liberating. In the car, Ricardo held her hand. You are a fascinating woman, Lucy Santana. Intelligent, powerful, compassionate. How could anyone have been foolish enough not to value that? Lucy smiled, looking out the window at the city that was now truly hers. Some people have to lose what they have to realize its value. Others have to be lost to rediscover their own value. And which one were you? I was the second, and it was the best thing that could have happened to me. When they arrived at her apartment, Lucy invited Ricardo up. There was no rush between them, no desperation or need for validation. There were just two intelligent, successful adults choosing to spend time together because they respected each other. On the balcony, with the lagoon shimmering under the city lights, Ricardo hugged her from behind as she looked out at the view. What are you thinking about? He asked. I'm thinking, Lucy said, leaning against him, that sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of a much better one. And for the first time in years, Lucy knew with absolute certainty that she wasn't just surviving her life. She was living it fully, on her own terms, as the absolute queen of her own destiny.
The gala had been planned for months. Invitations printed on heavy cream cardstock, embossed with gold foil, had arrived at the homes of the city's wealthiest families. The event was billed as a charity fundraiser for children's hospitals, but everyone knew it was more than that. It was a stage where fortunes were flaunted, alliances were made, and reputations were sharpened like knives. The Crystal Meridian Hotel had spared no expense. Its grand ballroom stretched wide with marble floors polished to a mirror shine. Chandeliers dripped with thousands of crystals, scattering light like shattered stars across gowns and tuxedos. Tables lined with orchids and roses gave off a perfume that hung in the air, mixing with the faint scent of expensive cigars and imported wine. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their violins weaving a soundtrack of elegance that barely masked the buzz of whispered gossip. To the guests, this was not just another party. It was an arena. CEOs leaned close to rival investors, pretending to exchange pleasantries while calculating future takeovers. Politicians smiled, with teeth too white, their hands already reaching for favors. Socialites twirled in couture dresses designed to be photographed and remembered. Every glance, every handshake, every laugh carried layers of meaning. And at the center of it all was Adrian Kane. He arrived fashionably late, allowing whispers to build before he even set foot on the marble. The doors opened, and he stepped through with Sienna Cruz attached to his arm like a prize he had won. Cameras exploded in flashes, the red fabric of her gown glowing like fire under the light. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her lips curled into a victorious smirk. Adrian loved it. He loved the way people turned, how the whispers followed him. He lived for power, and tonight he was feeding on it. But even as he smiled for the cameras, his eyes scanned the room, calculating who was watching, who was jealous, who might become useful tomorrow. On the far side of the ballroom, Elena stood quietly. Her navy dress was simple compared to the glittering gowns around her. No diamonds hung at her throat, no designer clutch dangled from her hand. She had only her presence, and that, though understated, spoke louder than sequins ever could. She looked fragile and strong all at once, her hand resting gently over her swollen belly. Few noticed her at first. To most, she was just another guest, another face in the crowd. But then someone whispered her name. The whispers spread like wildfire. Isn't that his ex-wife? The pregnant one? Why would she come here? Eyes turned, conversations faltered. Elena felt the heat of their stares prickling against her skin. She had prepared herself for this, had told herself she would stand tall. But the cruelty of high society always found its mark. They didn't see her as a woman or a mother. They saw her as a scandal, a headline, a story to feed their curiosity. Meanwhile, Sienna basked in the attention. She clutched Adrian's arm tighter, tilting her head to whisper in his ear. Her words carried just far enough for Elena to hear. She looks pathetic, like she doesn't belong here. Elena's jaw tightened. She refused to give Sienna the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, she lifted her chin, forcing her breathing steady. She had built this room. The architecture, the design, the elegance of the space, all of it bore her touch. Yet here she was, treated as though she were an intruder in her own creation. The irony burned. The gala pressed on, with waiters gliding across the floor carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Guests gathered in clusters, laughing too loudly, clinking glasses with people they secretly despised. On stage, a host gave a speech about generosity and compassion, while the audience nodded, their minds elsewhere, on stock portfolios, on mistresses, on reputations. To Elena, the whole evening felt like a play. Everyone was acting. Everyone wore masks. She thought of her own marriage, how Adrian had worn his mask so well that she hadn't seen the betrayal until it shattered her life. Her hand drifted protectively over her belly. She whispered to her child under her breath, "We'll be okay, I promise." But even as she said it, her throat tightened with unshed tears. Then came the moment that tipped the balance. Adrian led Sienna toward the center of the ballroom, where photographers waited. He posed deliberately, his hand on her waist, his smile wide. He introduced her to influential investors, as if she were his partner, his equal. Not a secret, not a fling. A statement. The crowd erupted in whispers, some feigning shock, others smirking knowingly. Cameras clicked, catching every angle. And there, across the room, Elena stood frozen, forced to watch her ex-husband rewrite history as if she had never existed. The orchestra swelled, playing a waltz. Couples glided onto the dance floor, their gowns sweeping in time with the music. Adrian pulled Sienna close, spinning her as cameras captured the perfect picture of glamour. And then, inevitably, someone turned to Elena and asked with mock sweetness, "Don't you wish you were out there too?" The cruelty of the question cut deep. Elena's lips parted, but no words came. Her chest heaved as the room spun, the chandeliers blurring into streaks of light. Her knees weakened, the chatter grew distant. She felt her body sway, her hand clutching at the air for balance. In that glittering room filled with power, wealth, and arrogance, Elena's heart began to fall. And as she collapsed onto the marble floor, surrounded by the gasps of New York's elite, one truth became clear. This night would not be remembered for its charity, but for the scandal that was about to erupt. Sienna Cruz had always known how to turn heads. At 26, she had perfected the art of entering a room like she owned it. Tonight, with her crimson dress hugging every curve and diamonds catching the light at her throat, she was more than a guest. She was a declaration. A declaration that she had won. She had clawed her way into this world from nothing. Born in Queens to a mother who worked double shifts at a diner and a father who disappeared before her second birthday, Sienna learned early that survival meant performance. She wasn't the smartest in her class, but she was the most ambitious. By 16, she had mastered how to use her beauty, her charm, and her ruthless instinct to climb ladders others didn't even know existed. When she met Adrian Kane at a corporate event, she recognized him instantly. Not as a man, but as an opportunity. He was older, powerful, radiating the kind of confidence that came from knowing the world bent to his will. Most women were intimidated by him. Sienna wasn't. She laughed louder, leaned closer, and gave him the thrill of being pursued. Within weeks, she was in his penthouse. Within months, she was in his bed. Now she was in his spotlight. As Elena lay collapsed on the marble, the room frozen in shock, Sienna's lips curled into something that was almost a smile. For her, this was victory served cold. She had spent months in Adrian's shadow, whispered about, dismissed as a passing fling. But tonight, the cameras captured her, not as a secret, but as the woman at Adrian Kane's side, while his ex-wife lay broken. She leaned into Adrian's ear, her voice low but sharp. "Don't make a scene, people are watching." But Adrian wasn't listening. For the first time all evening, the mask of arrogance had slipped. He stared at Elena, pale and trembling, and panic flared in his eyes. Sienna hated it. She hated the way he looked at her, like the ghost of a love he hadn't buried. "Adrian," she hissed, her nails digging into his arm, "she's not your problem anymore. Let the medics handle it." His jaw tightened, but he pulled away from her grip. Cameras caught the movement, the subtle rejection. And in that single gesture, Sienna felt the first sting of insecurity. She had worked too hard for this. She wasn't going to let Elena, weak, fragile Elena, steal the spotlight back. Sienna turned to the crowd, playing her role with venom hidden beneath velvet. "Oh, poor thing," she said loudly enough for the nearest guests to hear. "Pregnancy is so exhausting, isn't it? Maybe she shouldn't push herself to attend events like these." Gasps rippled. Some nodded in agreement, others exchanged uneasy glances. But the damage was done. The narrative had been seeded. Elena was fragile, irresponsible, unfit. Meanwhile, Adrian knelt beside his ex-wife, ignoring the whispers. For a man who thrived on reputation, this was uncharacteristic. He had built his empire on never showing weakness, never letting anyone see the cracks. But tonight, the sight of Elena on the floor pierced deeper than his pride. "Stay with me," he whispered urgently, his hand brushing her cheek. Cameras flashed, capturing the rare moment of vulnerability. For the tabloids, it was gold. For Sienna, it was poison. She clenched her fists, her nails leaving crescents in her palms. She had seen enough powerful men falter when faced with the ghosts of their pasts, but she had never expected Adrian Kane, her Adrian, to be one of them. As paramedics lifted Elena onto a stretcher, Sienna forced her lips back into a practiced smile. She moved closer to Adrian, clutching his arm as if to remind both him and the watching crowd of her place. "She'll be fine," she cooed sweetly, though her eyes were sharp with fury. "Focus on us. Tonight was supposed to be about us." Adrian didn't respond. His gaze followed the stretcher as it disappeared through the ballroom doors. His silence was louder than any argument, and Sienna felt it like a slap, but she wasn't done. Later, as whispers consumed the gala and reporters rushed to send headlines, Sienna positioned herself carefully among the investors. She laughed at their jokes, brushed off their curiosity, and painted herself as the picture of elegance. "Yes, it was dramatic," she told one silver-haired CEO. "But really, it's best to leave the past in the past. Adrian deserves peace, not more drama." It was calculated. Every word, every smile. She wanted the room to see her as the stable one, the one who belonged at Adrian's side, not the fragile ex-wife. And yet, deep inside, doubt festered. When she caught Adrian standing alone by the balcony, his hands gripping the railing, his expression clouded, she knew the truth. Elena still had a hold on him. It wasn't love, she told herself. It was guilt. Guilt over the child. Guilt over abandoning a woman who had once stood by him. But guilt was dangerous. Guilt could undo everything. Sienna walked toward him, her heels clicking like daggers on marble. She slipped her arm around his waist, leaning close enough that her perfume enveloped him. "Don't let her drag you down," she whispered. "You've worked too hard. She chose to come here. Don't let her weakness ruin your night." Adrian turned his head slowly, his eyes narrowing. For once, his voice was cold toward her. "Weakness? She's carrying my child." The words landed like stones in Sienna's stomach. She forced a laugh, but her pulse raced. "Exactly. That's all she is now. The mother of your child. You've moved on. You have me." But Adrian's silence lingered, heavy and dangerous. He pulled away, excusing himself to make a call. Sienna stood alone, her fists clenched, her smile brittle. For the first time since stepping into the spotlight, Sienna Cruz realized her crown wasn't secure. And in that shimmering ballroom filled with power, money, and lies, she made herself a promise. If Elena Hart dared to rise again, she would crush her. No mercy, no hesitation. What Sienna didn't know was that outside, under the glare of ambulance lights, forces were already shifting, and Elena was about to gain an ally who would change everything. The moment Elena's body hit the marble, the ballroom turned into a theater of chaos. Gasps rose from every corner, hands flew to jeweled mouths, and whispers erupted like wildfire. The music stopped mid-note, violins hanging in silence. For one fragile heartbeat, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Then the flashes began. Photographers at the edge of the room raised their cameras, the shutters snapping relentlessly. To them, compassion was irrelevant. Opportunity was everything. The scene was worth more than any charity headline. Billionaire's pregnant ex-wife collapses at gala. The story practically wrote itself. Alina, lying pale on the cold floor, felt the world spin in dizzying circles. Her chest tightened, her breathing shallow. Somewhere in the distance she heard voices, urgent, panicked, cruel. "Is she drunk?" one guest whispered. "No, she's pregnant," another replied, the tone dripping with judgment. "Tragic," a third murmured. "But why show up here at all? She's embarrassing herself." Every word sliced through the haze of her consciousness. She wanted to scream that she hadn't come here to fight, that she had only wanted to reclaim a sliver of her dignity. But her lips trembled soundlessly, her strength abandoning her. Adrian's shadow loomed above her. He knelt, his polished shoes scuffing against the marble, his face taut with panic. For the first time in years, his voice cracked. "Elena, stay with me. Look at me." Her eyes fluttered open. She saw him, not the ruthless billionaire, not the man who betrayed her, but the boy she had once loved, the man who had once promised to protect her. The vision tore her heart in two. "Don't," she whispered faintly, pushing his hand away from her face. "Touch me." Gasps surged louder this time. The crowd hung on every word, the humiliation amplified under the spotlight. To them, it wasn't a tragedy, it was entertainment. The paramedics arrived, breaking through the circle of gawkers. They crouched down, their voices brisk and commanding. "Ma'am, can you hear me? Stay with us. We're taking you to the hospital." Elena tried to nod, but her body betrayed her. Her head lolled against the stretcher as they lifted her gently. Her hand, trembling, pressed against her swollen belly, as though shielding her child from the cruelty surrounding them. Outside, the chaos only grew. Reporters swarmed the ambulance, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing. "Adrian, what happened? Is the baby in danger? Do you regret leaving her?" Adrian shielded his eyes from the barrage, his jaw clenched. For the first time, the master of control had no answers. His empire, his mistress, his carefully curated image, all of it paled in comparison to the sight of Alina disappearing into the ambulance. Sienna followed, her heels clattering angrily against the pavement. She pasted on a smile for the cameras, though her eyes burned with rage. "It's nothing," she told a reporter sweetly. "She's just overwhelmed. You know how delicate some women can be." The word spread instantly, recorded, tweeted, posted. Within minutes, hashtags trended worldwide. Gala scandal, billionaire X, Alina heart collapse. By the time Alina reached the hospital, her humiliation was already viral. Tabloids published side-by-side photos, Sienna glowing on Adrian's arm, Alina pale and fragile on the floor. The headlines were merciless. Billionaire's new flame shines while ex-wife crumbles. Adrian Kane's past collapses at his feet. Pregnancy drama at the gala of the year. In the sterile hospital room, Elena lay weak but conscious. Monitors beeped steadily, her baby's heartbeat echoing faintly through the speakers. Relief washed over her at the sound, but it was short-lived. She knew the outside world was devouring her pain like a feast. Her phone, resting on the bedside table, buzzed endlessly. Messages from friends, colleagues, even strangers flooded in. Some offered sympathy. Others spewed venom. One text from an unknown number read simply, "Pathetic. Stay home next time." Tears pricked her eyes, but she bit them back. She had cried too much already. She would not give them more. Meanwhile, across the city, Adrian's PR team scrambled. They issued statements about health concerns, crafted excuses, tried to spin the narrative. But no press release could erase the image of him kneeling beside his ex-wife, panic etched on his face. No carefully chosen words could erase Elena's rejection. "Don't touch me." Sienna, however, wasted no time. She called in favors with influencers, fed quotes to gossip sites. She painted Alina as unstable, desperate, clinging to a man who had already moved on. "She came to the gala just to make a scene," Sienna told one journalist privately, knowing it would be published by morning. And it was. By dawn, Alina's reputation was in tatters. The world saw her not as the gifted architect who once dreamed of building sanctuaries, but as the fragile ex-wife who collapsed under the weight of humiliation. Back at the hospital, Elena stared at the ceiling, her hand on her stomach. She whispered to her unborn child, "I'll protect you. Even if the world laughs, I'll protect you." Her voice cracked, but her resolve hardened. because beneath the pain, a fire was beginning to spark. She remembered the whispers, the judgment, the way Sienna smirked. She remembered Adrian's silence, his failure to shield her, his willingness to let her be devoured by the wolves. And she realized something vital. She could no longer wait for anyone to save her. If she was going to rise again, she would have to do it herself. But fate had other plans. As the night deepened, footsteps echoed in the hospital hallway. A figure appeared in the doorway, a man she had not seen in years, his presence commanding, his expression unreadable. He wasn't just anyone. He was Michael Blackwood, a billionaire whose name carried weight across continents. More importantly, he had once been Elena's friend. His eyes softened as they met hers. "Elena," he said quietly, "you don't have to go through this alone." And in that single moment, everything began to change. The sterile scent of disinfectant lingered in the hospital room. Machines hummed quietly, their steady beeps a cruel reminder that Elena was tethered to fragile life by wires and tubes. She stared at the ceiling, her body heavy, her spirit heavier. The collapse at the gala had left her drained, but the humiliation burned deeper than the faint bruises on her skin. Her child stirred inside her, a tiny movement that should have comforted her. Instead, it filled her with guilt. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I should be stronger for you, but I don't know how much more I can take." Her mother, Margaret, sat in the corner, her face lined with worry. She had rushed in as soon as the news broke, her nurse's instincts colliding with a mother's heartache. She wanted to soothe her daughter, but she knew words would only skim the surface of the wound. "The baby's strong," she said softly. "The doctor said you just need rest." But Elena shook her head, her eyes glassy. "It's not just about rest, Mom. It's the whole world. They saw me fall. They laughed. They called me weak." Margaret moved closer, taking her hand. "Let them talk. They don't know you. You've survived worse." But Elena wasn't sure. This wasn't just gossip whispered in small-town streets. This was global, viral, unrelenting. The image of her collapsing was replayed on every network, dissected on every blog. Sienna's sly comments circulated like venom. Adrian's silence was spun into 1,000 interpretations, none of them flattering to her. Alone at night, when her mother dozed in the chair and the hallway quieted, Elena scrolled through her phone despite the doctor's warning to avoid stress. The comments seared her. She just wanted attention. Pathetic ex-wife moment. No wonder he left her. She can't even take care of herself. How will she raise a child? Each word was a dagger. She put the phone down, pressing her hands against her ears as if she could block out the voices. But they echoed anyway, replaying in her mind until tears soaked her pillow. The nurses were kind, but kindness only reminded her of how far she had fallen. She had once walked red carpets, introduced as Adrian Kane's wife. Now she was a patient, pitied, and whispered about in the same breath. Adrian visited once, late at night when the cameras were gone. He stood awkwardly at the foot of her bed, his hands shoved into his pockets. For a moment he looked almost human, his arrogance stripped away. "Elena," he said softly, I'm glad you and the baby are okay." She didn't respond, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, refusing to meet his. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he continued. "The stress, the crowd, it was too much. Maybe you should have stayed home." The words shattered whatever fragile hope remained in her chest. He still didn't understand. To him, her collapse was an inconvenience, not a wound. He hadn't come to comfort her. He had come to absolve himself. "Get out," she whispered. "Elena, get out." Her voice trembled, but it carried steel. For once he listened. He turned, his footsteps echoing down the hall, leaving her lonelier than before. The next morning, a bouquet arrived with no card. Roses, perfectly arranged, placed carefully on her bedside table. For a fleeting moment, she thought Adrian had sent them as an apology. But the nurse said differently. "They're from Michael Blackwood," she explained. Elena blinked. The name stirred old memories. Long nights in college studios, late conversations about dreams, a man who had once been her closest friend before Adrian pulled her into his orbit. Michael had disappeared into the world of global business, becoming a billionaire in his own right. She hadn't spoken to him in years. She touched the petals, her mind swirling with questions. Why now? Why him? But even the gesture couldn't lift the crushing weight of despair. On the third night, alone again, she broke. She slid from the bed and knelt on the cold floor, clutching her belly as sobs racked her body. "I can't do this," she cried. "I can't raise you while the world hates me. I can't fight them. I can't fight him." Her tears dripped onto the linoleum, her shoulders shaking violently. In that moment, she was no longer Elena Hart, the talented architect, the woman who once dreamed of changing skylines. She was just a broken soul, begging the universe for relief. Her mother found her there, crumpled and trembling. She wrapped her arms around her daughter, rocking her gently like she had when Elena was a child. "You are not weak," Margaret whispered fiercely. "You are stronger than any of them. You just can't see it yet." But Elena wasn't convinced. By morning, more tabloids had printed stories. Paparazzi lingered outside the hospital. Sienna gave another interview, smirking as she dismissed Elena as an unfortunate distraction. Investors whispered that Adrian's reputation had been dented by his ex-wife's drama. Elena watched it unfold from her hospital bed, her spirit sinking lower with every headline. She had become a liability, a spectacle, a joke. One evening, as the city lights blinked outside her window, Michael Blackwood appeared again, not just as flowers this time, but in person. He filled the doorway with quiet strength, his tailored suit sharp, his gaze steady. "Elena," he said gently, stepping closer. "You don't deserve this, none of it, and I won't stand by while they destroy you." She looked up, her eyes swollen from crying. "It's too late, Michael. They already have." He shook his head, pulling up a chair. "No, they've only written their version of the story, but you still have yours, and I can help you tell it." His words lingered in the room, a spark against the darkness. For the first time in days, Elena felt a flicker of something she thought she had lost, hope. And as Michael leaned forward, his eyes burning with determination, Elena realized her downfall might only be the beginning of her rise. The hospital room was quiet except for the faint hum of machines. Elena sat upright against the pillows, her hair loose around her shoulders, her eyes still rimmed with exhaustion. She had expected another night of silence, maybe another restless attempt to sleep, but instead, Michael Blackwood stood at the foot of her bed. It had been nearly a decade since she had last seen him. Back then, he had been the brilliant, stubborn business student who pulled all-nighters beside her in the university library. He had carried a notebook full of ideas that most people dismissed as impossible dreams. But Michael never cared about being dismissed. He only cared about proving them wrong. And he had. Now, at 40, he was one of the most powerful men in the world. His name carried weight in every boardroom, his empire stretched across industries, and his fortune dwarfed Adrian's by billions. To most people, he was untouchable. To Elena, in this fragile moment, he was the first face from her past that didn't judge, didn't sneer, didn't pity. "Michael," she whispered, still disbelieving, "why are you here?" He pulled a chair closer, his movements measured. "Because I saw what happened. The entire world saw what happened, and I couldn't sit back and let them tear you apart." Elena looked down, ashamed. "They already did. I'm a headline now, a punchline." "Not if you stop letting them control the story," Michael said, his tone calm but firm. She shook her head. "You don't understand. Adrian owns the narrative. He has money, media, influence. Sienna feeds them whatever lie she wants, and they believe it. What do I have? Nothing." Michael leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "You have me." The words startled her. She searched his face for pity but found none. His expression was resolute, steady, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "Elena," he continued, "Adrian doesn't just control the media. He controls perception. He built an empire on arrogance and manipulation. But I know things about him, things that could destroy the pedestal he stands on. And if you're willing, I'll help you expose him." Her breath caught. "Expose him? Why?" Michael's jaw tightened. "Because men like Adrian believe they can crush anyone who stands in their way. He thinks you're broken, he thinks you'll crawl back or disappear quietly. But I won't let him win, not this time. Not at your expense." Elena's heart raced. The thought of Adrian's empire crumbling was intoxicating, but fear wrapped tightly around her chest. "Michael, I don't want revenge. I just want peace." "Peace doesn't come from silence," Michael replied. "It comes from standing up, from showing the world you're not who they think you are. And you're not weak, Elena. You never were." She turned her face away, tears threatening again. "I don't know if I can." Michael reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sleek black folder. He laid it gently on her lap. "Then let me show you something." With trembling hands, Elena opened the folder. Inside were documents, photographs, contracts, evidence. Adrian's deals, the ones he bragged about, the ones that made him untouchable, weren't as clean as the world believed. Hidden within the glossy surface of his empire were cracks. Illegal partnerships, backdoor deals, scandals hushed with money. Elena's eyes widened as she scanned the pages. How do you have this?" Michael's gaze held hers. "Because I've been watching him. Adrian isn't just your ex-husband, Elena. He's my rival. And when he hurt you, he made it personal." Her mind spun. She had come to the gala to reclaim dignity, only to collapse in humiliation. And now, just days later, she held in her hands the power to destroy the man who had broken her. Her fingers trembled over the papers. "If this is true, if I use it, they'll turn against him. He'll fall. And you'll rise," Michael said simply. The idea terrified her. She had never sought power, never dreamed of revenge. Her world had always been about creation, not destruction. Yet something deep inside stirred, a memory of who she used to be. The woman who sketched buildings not because she was told to, but because she believed in beauty, in strength, in making her mark. For the first time since the divorce, Elena felt a flicker of that old fire. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "You could use this yourself. Take him down without me." Michael's expression softened. "Because this isn't about me. It's about you taking back what he stole. Your voice, your dignity, your future. And if you decide to fight, I'll stand beside you. Every step." Her throat tightened. She had been abandoned, mocked, discarded. Now someone was offering not just sympathy, but power. Still, doubt gnawed at her. "What if I fail?" Michael leaned closer, his voice low and steady. "Then you fail standing, not kneeling, and that makes all the difference." Silence filled the room. Outside, sirens wailed faintly in the city, the world still spinning with gossip and headlines. But in that small space, Elena felt time pause. The weight of choice pressed against her chest. She closed the folder slowly, her hands steadying. "If I do this, if I fight, it won't just be about me. It'll be about my child, about the life I want them to have." Michael nodded. "Then let's give them a future worth fighting for." For the first time in days, Elena sat taller. The despair that had drowned her began to thin, replaced by something sharper, something alive. She wasn't sure if it was courage or anger, but it was enough. And as she met Michael's unwavering gaze, Elena realized this wasn't just survival anymore. It was the beginning of war. The morning sunlight filtered through the hospital blinds, casting pale stripes across Elena's bed. For days she had lain there, weakened, trapped between shame and exhaustion. But now, something inside her had shifted. Michael's words still echoed in her mind. "Peace doesn't come from silence. It comes from standing up." She rose slowly, her legs unsteady, but her spirit steadier than it had been in months. Each step across the room felt like defiance, a small rebellion against the humiliation that had nearly destroyed her. She caught her reflection in the mirror above the sink, pale skin, tired eyes, hair tangled from restless nights. For a moment, she barely recognized herself. But then she pressed her hand against the mirror, whispering, "This isn't who you are, not anymore." When Margaret arrived with breakfast, she was startled to see her daughter sitting upright, her back straight, her gaze fierce. "Elena, you need to rest," she urged. "I will," Elena replied, "but not in the way you think." By the end of the week, she was discharged. The cameras swarmed outside, shouting questions, snapping photos, hoping for another glimpse of the broken woman. But Elena didn't lower her head this time. She walked past them with quiet dignity, her navy coat wrapped around her, her hand protectively over her belly. She didn't answer a single question. Silence was no longer weakness. It was strategy. Michael waited for her by the car. The moment their eyes met, she gave him a small nod. A silent agreement. She was ready. The next days were a blur of transformation. Michael introduced her to his inner circle. Stylists, advisors, and strategists who understood not just fashion but perception. "If they want to treat you like a spectacle," Michael told her, "then you'll give them one, but on your terms." Her old clothes, plain and functional, were replaced with tailored gowns that exuded elegance without pretense. A stylist swept her hair into clean, powerful lines that framed her face, revealing the strength in her features. Makeup no longer tried to hide her pain. It highlighted her resilience. When she saw herself in the mirror after the first fitting, her breath caught. She didn't look like the humiliated woman sprawled on the gala floor. She looked like someone reborn. But the transformation wasn't just about appearance. Michael insisted on more. "You need to speak," he said. "Not just to defend yourself, but to define yourself. The world needs to hear your voice, not his lies." So he arranged sessions with a coach, teaching her how to hold her posture, how to use silence as power, how to look a reporter in the eye and let them know she wasn't afraid. At first, Elena stumbled, her voice shaking, her nerves fraying. But each session chipped away at the fear until her words grew clear, strong, undeniable. Privately, she returned to her sketches too. Late at night, when the city quieted, she sat at her desk with pencil in hand, drawing lines that grew into buildings, structures that symbolized resilience. She realized she hadn't lost her gift. It had only been buried under grief. One evening, Margaret found her hunched over a sketchpad. "You're designing again," her mother whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Elena smiled faintly. "I need to remember who I am." Meanwhile, the world outside continued to churn. Sienna posed for magazines, flaunting her relationship with Adrian. Headlines screamed of her glamour, her charm, her supposed place at his side. But cracks began to show. Anonymous leaks hinted at Adrian's shady deals. Whispers spread through boardrooms that his empire wasn't as stable as it seemed. And for the first time, Elena didn't shrink from the headlines. She studied them, her eyes sharp, waiting for the right moment. Michael guided her carefully. "This isn't just about revenge," he reminded her. "It's about showing the world that you can't be erased. When you rise, you don't just rise for yourself. You rise for every woman who was ever told she was nothing without a man." The words became her anchor. The night of her first public appearance since the collapse arrived 2 weeks later. It wasn't a gala or a red carpet. It was a charity fundraiser for single mothers, one that Michael had quietly sponsored. When Elena entered, the room hushed. Cameras turned, flashes exploded, but this time, she was ready. She wore a flowing white gown that emphasized her pregnancy, not as a weakness, but as a crown. Her posture was tall, her gaze steady, her hand resting protectively yet proudly over her belly. Whispers rippled. "Is that her? She looks different, stronger." When she stepped onto the stage to speak, the crowd held its breath. Her voice wavered for only a moment before steadying. "I am Elena Hart," she began. "Some of you may know me only from the headlines, the woman who fell. But what you don't know is that I am still standing, and I always will." Applause erupted. Cameras captured every word, every expression. The narrative was shifting. No longer was she the ex-wife defined by humiliation. She was becoming a symbol of resilience. Back in their penthouse, Adrian and Sienna watched the broadcast on television. Sienna scoffed, rolling her eyes. "She's milking it, playing the victim." But Adrian didn't respond. His jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the screen. For the first time, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: fear. Because Elena wasn't disappearing. She was returning, and she was stronger than before. Later that night, after the event ended, Michael found her backstage, her cheeks flushed, her eyes bright with adrenaline. "You did it," he said simply. Elena shook her head. "No, I just started." And as she spoke, she realized the truth. Her transformation wasn't just about surviving Adrian's betrayal. It was about preparing for the moment she would face him again, not as a victim, but as his equal. The night of the Global Humanitarian Gala arrived like a storm waiting to break. It was the kind of event that drew the richest, the most powerful, and the most ruthless into one glittering room. The ballroom of the Empire Crown Hotel glistened with chandeliers, velvet drapes, and golden candelabras. Journalists lined the carpet, flashes popping like fireworks as limousines pulled up one after another. For Adrian Kane, this was supposed to be another victory lap. Dressed in a tailored tuxedo, his arm around Sienna's waist, he strode into the ballroom like a king. Sienna, dazzling in emerald silk, clung to him like a queen. Together they posed for cameras, their smiles polished, their eyes hungry. But beneath the surface, Adrian was restless. He had seen Elena's recent appearance on television, her quiet strength, her poised words. It unsettled him. He told himself she was no threat, just a fleeting story. But deep inside, fear gnawed at him. Sienna noticed his distraction and squeezed his hand. "Forget her," she whispered. "Tonight is ours." But tonight wasn't theirs. Tonight belonged to Alina. The doors of the ballroom opened again, and she entered. The crowd turned instantly, whispers rippling like waves. Alina Hart, once the humiliated ex-wife, now stood tall in a sleek black gown that flowed elegantly around her growing belly. A diamond pin glimmered at her shoulder, a subtle gift from Michael. Her hair was swept back, her makeup sharp, but it was her expression, calm, fearless, that silenced the room. She didn't sneak in. She didn't try to blend. She walked straight down the carpet, her heels clicking like a drumbeat of defiance. The cameras roared to life, reporters nearly tripping over each other to capture her return. Is that her? She looks incredible. She's not hiding anymore. Adrian froze, his hand tightening around Sienna's arm. Sienna's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing with fury. "She's trying to upstage me," she hissed. "She's trying to upstage us," Adrian muttered. But even as he said it, he couldn't look away. Elena didn't glance at them. She took her place near the stage, her presence commanding, her silence louder than any insult Sienna had ever thrown. Michael appeared beside her, offering his arm. The sight of the two of them together sent another shockwave through the room. The evening unfolded with speeches, performances, and auctions. Yet no one could focus. Every eye returned to Elena, every whisper circled around her. She wasn't just a guest, she was the story. Then came the moment. The host stepped onto the stage, announcing the evening's keynote segment, a panel highlighting leaders who inspire change. Elena's name was called. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Cameras zoomed in, Adrian's jaw tightened. Sienna scoffed. They're really letting her speak? But Elena walked onto the stage with grace, her hand resting proudly on her belly, her eyes scanning the crowd. She paused deliberately when her gaze landed on Adrian and Sienna. Then she began. "For weeks," she said, her voice clear, "the world has defined me by a single moment. When I fell, they replayed it, they dissected it, they called me weak. But tonight, I want to show you what strength really looks like." The room stilled, every ear tuned in. I was betrayed, I was humiliated, I was told I would not survive without the man who abandoned me. But I stand here tonight, not as his ex-wife, not as a victim, but as a woman who refuses to be erased. And I am not alone. Every woman who has ever been silenced, every mother who has ever been dismissed, stands here with me. Applause erupted. Flashes blinded the stage. Elena lifted the black folder Michael had given her. "And because truth is stronger than lies, I will no longer remain silent about the man who tried to destroy me." Gasps rippled. Adrian's blood turned cold. Sienna grabbed his arm. "What is she doing?" Elena opened the folder, her voice steady. "Here are the deals Adrian Kane doesn't want you to know about. Illegal partnerships, fraud, money hidden offshore. For years he built an empire on deception. And while he paraded his mistress on his arm, he thought no one would dare expose him. He was wrong." Chaos erupted. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions. Guests murmured in shock. Adrian's face flushed crimson, his composure cracking. "That's a lie," he shouted, rising from his table. "She's bitter, she's unstable, she's making this up." Elena met his rage with calm. "Am I? Then explain these contracts. Explain the signatures. Explain the millions siphoned away while you told the world you were a man of honor." She held up document after document, cameras flashing with every reveal. Sienna clutched Adrian's arm, panicked. "Do something. Stop her." But Adrian could only stand there, the room spinning against him. His empire, his reputation, his carefully crafted image, it was all unraveling under Elena's steady voice. The applause grew louder, drowning his protests. Elena closed the folder with finality, her gaze sweeping the crowd. "This is not just my story. This is a reminder that truth always rises, even when lies try to bury it." Standing ovation. Reporters stormed the stage, microphones raised, cameras blazing. Adrian tried to shout over them, but no one listened. Sienna's glamorous smile had crumbled into terror. Elena stepped down, Michael at her side, her chin high. She had come into the lion's den, and she had left the lions caged. But as she walked past Adrian, his furious eyes locked on hers, and she knew one thing: he wasn't finished. And the battle that followed would be even darker. The aftermath of the gala rippled through the city like an earthquake. By dawn, every news outlet in the country had splashed Elena Hart's face across their front pages. Headlines screamed her victory. "Ex-wife shatters billionaire's empire with truth." Alina Hart, from humiliation to hero, Adrian Kane exposed. The documents she had unveiled were undeniable. Reporters pored over them, experts confirmed their validity, and law enforcement could no longer look away. Adrian's empire, once seen as invincible, began to crack overnight. Stock prices plummeted, investors withdrew, board members resigned, and while the world had once laughed at Alina, now they stood in awe. For years, Adrian had defined her as fragile, replaceable, irrelevant. But Alina had proven him wrong in the most public way possible. She hadn't just reclaimed her dignity, she had dismantled the illusion he had built. Sienna Cruz vanished from the spotlight almost immediately. The glamorous mistress who once strutted in emerald gowns now refused to leave her apartment. Tabloids that once praised her beauty now mocked her arrogance. She had gambled her reputation on Adrian's power, and when that power collapsed, she was left with nothing but scorn. Adrian, meanwhile, faced the full weight of consequence. Prosecutors launched investigations into his business dealings. Former allies turned against him to save themselves. The man who had once sneered at Alina from gilded thrones now spent his days in boardrooms filled with lawyers, his empire reduced to ashes. And through it all, Alina remained calm. She gave only one interview, a sit-down broadcast viewed by millions. Dressed in simple white, her hair pulled back, she spoke not with bitterness but with clarity. "I don't share my story for revenge," she said softly, "but for truth. No woman should be silenced. No mother should be mocked for carrying life, and no one, no matter how powerful, should believe they are untouchable." The audience applauded. Viewers wept. Letters poured in from women across the country, thanking her for giving them courage. For Alina, the true victory was not Adrian's fall, but the rising chorus of voices that said, "If she can stand again, so can I." Meanwhile, her personal life began to heal. Her mother, Margaret, stayed by her side, beaming with pride. "You remind me of your father," she told her one evening as they sat on the porch of their family home. Strong, unshakable when it matters most. Alina placed a hand on her belly, feeling the gentle kick of her child. "I want my baby to grow up knowing that strength isn't about money or power. It's about standing tall when the world tries to push you down." Michael Blackwood remained a constant presence. He had offered her strategy, protection, and friendship when she needed it most. But as the weeks passed, their bond deepened into something neither of them had expected. It wasn't the reckless passion she once had with Adrian. It was steadier, built on respect, on history, on shared battles. One afternoon, Michael found her sketching in the sunlit corner of her new office. "You're working again," he said, smiling. She looked up, her eyes bright. "I'm starting my own firm. Projects for women, by women. Affordable housing, schools, spaces that actually serve people instead of egos." Michael's smile grew wider. "That sounds like exactly the kind of empire worth building." For the first time in years, Alina felt whole. She was not defined by the man who betrayed her, not even by the scandal that had once crushed her. She was defined by what she chose to create, by the life she chose to live. The night her baby was born, she held the tiny, crying miracle in her arms and felt the final piece of her heart knit itself back together. Tears streamed down her face, not from sorrow, but from release. She whispered into her child's ear, "You saved me. You gave me a reason to fight. And I promise, I'll never let the world break us again." News outlets tried to get photos, but Alina kept that moment private. The world could have its headlines, but this was hers alone, a sacred beginning, untouched by gossip. Months later, she made one final public appearance. Not at a gala, not at a press conference, but at a small community center her new firm had just completed. Surrounded by children laughing, mothers smiling, and volunteers clapping, she stood on a modest stage and spoke. "I once believed my story ended the night I collapsed on a marble floor," she said. "But I was wrong. That night was not my ending. It was my beginning. Every fall is an invitation to rise. Every betrayal is a chance to rediscover your strength. And every woman deserves to know, you are not weak. You are not disposable. You are extraordinary." The crowd erupted in cheers, not the polite applause of wealthy elites, but the raw gratitude of people who saw themselves in her journey. As Alina stepped down, Michael was waiting. He took her hand, not possessively like Adrian once had, but gently, as an equal. She looked at him, then at the future stretching before her. Her child, her work, her new life. It was not the fairy tale she once dreamed of. It was something better. And as the sun set behind her, Alina Hart walked forward with a smile. No longer a woman defined by her fall, but a woman who taught the world how to rise. So, my dear friends, our story has come to an end. If you are still here with me right now, it means something in Alina's journey has touched your heart in a very personal way. Her story reminds us that even when we are betrayed, humiliated, or pushed to the floor, we can still rise stronger. As Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." What tried to break Alina became the very thing that rebuilt her. And perhaps that is true for each of us. If you feel moved, I invite you to carry this lesson into your own life. Your scars do not define your weakness. They define your strength. Share this story with someone who needs it. Like this video if it gave you hope. And don't forget to subscribe so we can continue to walk through these powerful journeys together. Because here we rise, always, together. The ballroom glittered with light, laughter, and lies. Chandeliers spilled golden beams over the polished marble floor, where New York's elite mingled with glasses of champagne in their hands. Reporters gathered by the velvet ropes, snapping photos, waiting for the grand entrance of the evening's most anticipated guest, billionaire Adrian Kane. And he didn't disappoint. Adrian walked in with his mistress, Sienna Cruz, clinging to his arm. She was young, dazzling in a crimson dress that left little to the imagination. Every step she took screamed victory, and she knew the cameras were on her. For weeks, tabloids had whispered about their affair, but tonight was the first time Adrian dared to flaunt her in public. To him, it was power. To her, it was triumph. To everyone else, it was scandal. But what no one expected was that his ex-wife, Alina Hart, 6 months pregnant with his child, would be there too. Alina hadn't planned to attend. She hated crowds, hated the way the wealthy paraded their jewels like trophies. But as an architect, she had helped design the very ballroom where the charity gala was being held. She had been invited as a courtesy, a footnote in an evening full of glittering names. She almost stayed home, but something inside told her to face the world again, to stop hiding after the painful divorce. She walked in quietly, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly, her long navy gown simple but elegant. She didn't belong among the sequins and diamonds, yet her presence drew whispers. Some pitied her, some mocked her, but most were simply curious. What was Adrian's discarded wife doing here? Alina felt the eyes, the judgment, the sting of gossip. She ignored it. She had survived the long nights alone, the cruel headlines, the betrayal of a man she once believed was her forever. She wasn't here for him. She was here to prove to herself that she could still stand tall. But fate was cruel. Across the ballroom, the crowd parted as Adrian pulled Sienna closer, his hand possessively on her waist. His smug smile grew wider when he saw Alina. Sienna leaned in and whispered something that made him chuckle, his eyes cold and sharp. The photographers sensed the tension immediately. Their flashes went off like lightning. Click, click, click. One headline was already writing itself. Billionaire flaunts mistress, ex-wife watches in shame. Alina's chest tightened. She told herself to breathe, to stay calm, but her legs felt weak. The betrayal replayed in her mind. Adrian coming home smelling of another woman's perfume, his excuses, his arrogance, his final words before signing the divorce papers. "You'll never survive without me." She tried to hold her ground. She even forced a smile, though her eyes shimmered with tears. But then Sienna laughed, loud enough for Alina to hear. "Is that the ex-wife? Poor thing. She looks like a servant who got lost." The words pierced deeper than knives. The room blurred. Alina reached for a chair, but her hand slipped. Pain shot through her body, sharp and sudden. A gasp escaped her lips. Then, in front of everyone, Alina collapsed onto the marble floor. For a moment, silence fell. The music stopped. Guests froze, unsure whether to rush forward or to keep sipping their drinks. Whispers swirled like poison smoke. "She's pregnant. Did she faint? Is it the stress?" The paparazzi didn't hesitate. Cameras flashed mercilessly as Alina lay on the ground, clutching her belly. It wasn't just a scandal now. It was a spectacle. Adrian's face drained of color. He had always thought of himself as untouchable, a man above consequence. But seeing Alina motionless, pale, and vulnerable in front of flashing cameras shook something in him. For a split second, the mask of arrogance cracked. "Call an ambulance," someone shouted. Sienna tugged at his arm, hissing, "Don't. It's her problem, not yours." But Adrian couldn't move. His chest tightened as guilt, fear, and something dangerously close to love surged inside him. Elena wasn't just his ex-wife, she was the mother of his unborn child. He pushed past the crowd now beside her and cupped her face. "Elena, stay with me, please." His voice trembled, breaking through the facade of control he always carried. Elena's eyes fluttered, barely open. She saw his face, the man who had broken her heart, the man she thought she hated. And yet, in that instant, her tears slipped free. "Don't touch me," she whispered weakly, her hand pressing harder against her belly. The crowd gasped again. The paparazzi captured every word, every angle. Headlines were multiplying by the second. "Pregnant ex-wife collapses at gala, billionaire kneels in panic." Paramedics rushed in, parting the crowd with urgency. They lifted Elena onto a stretcher, their voices brisk and calm. "She needs immediate care. Move aside." Adrian tried to follow, but a paramedic blocked his way. "Sir, only family." The word sliced through him. Family. Once, Elena had been his world. Now he wasn't even allowed to walk beside her in crisis. He watched helplessly as she was carried out, her face pale against the white sheets, her hand still clutching her unborn child. Reporters shouted questions. "Adrian, will you take responsibility? Is the baby yours? Will you leave the mistress for her?" Sienna's face twisted in fury. This wasn't the story she wanted. She wanted to be the star, not the villain. She grabbed Adrian's arm, but he shook her off, his eyes locked on the ambulance lights fading into the distance. For the first time in years, Adrian Kane felt powerless. The empire he built, the reputation he flaunted, the mistress he clung to, all of it meant nothing compared to the image seared in his mind. Elena collapsing, whispering those final words, rejecting his touch. And deep down, a terrifying thought crept into his mind. What if she doesn't survive this night? What if he loses her and the child forever? And as the sirens wailed into the night, the question remained. Was this the end of Elena's story, or the beginning of Adrian's reckoning? Before Elena Hart became the woman lying unconscious on a stretcher, she had been a girl who believed in love. Her story did not begin in glittering ballrooms or beneath the flash of paparazzi cameras. It began in a small town 2 hours outside of New York City, where the streets smelled of fresh bread from the corner bakery, and neighbors knew each other's names. Elena grew up in a modest brick house with peeling paint and a wild garden her mother tended with devotion. Life was not rich in money, but it was rich in warmth. Her father, Thomas Hart, worked as a history teacher at the local high school. Her mother, Margaret, was a nurse whose hands always carried the faint scent of antiseptic and lavender lotion. Together they raised Elena with values that would guide her long after childhood ended. Kindness, resilience, and faith in people's goodness. Elena was bright, curious, and endlessly creative. She spent afternoons sketching buildings in her notebooks, fascinated by the way light played on rooftops and how spaces could make people feel safe or small. By the time she turned 16, she knew she wanted to be an architect. Her dream wasn't about wealth or fame. It was about creating beauty that mattered. Homes where families could feel what she once felt. Security, love, belonging. She worked hard, earned scholarships, and eventually walked through the gates of Columbia University with stars in her eyes. It was there, in her sophomore year, that she met Adrian Kane. He wasn't a billionaire then. He was just a business major with ambition written in every gesture, every smile. He carried himself with confidence that bordered on arrogance, but when he looked at Elena, something softer shone through. He noticed her sketches, asked her about her projects, and listened. Really listened when she spoke of her dreams. For a girl who had grown up far from privilege, his attention felt like sunlight. He made her laugh, made her feel seen in ways she had never experienced before. Within months, they were inseparable. By the time they graduated, Adrian had already started laying the foundation of the empire he would one day command. And Elena, she believed she was building a future with him, one brick of trust at a time. Their wedding was small, intimate, held in the very garden where Elena had played as a child. Her parents beamed with pride. Adrian promised to cherish her, to stand by her side no matter what storms came. And Elena, with all the sincerity of a woman in love, believed him. For a while, life felt like a dream. Adrian's businesses grew rapidly, drawing investors and media attention. Alina began working at a respected architectural firm, designing schools and community centers. They were busy, yes, but they were together. On quiet evenings, Adrian would bring her takeout after long hours at the office, and she would show him her sketches, imagining a house of their own one day. But power changes people. As Adrian climbed higher, the man she married began to slip away. He spent more nights at meetings, more weekends at corporate retreats. He grew sharper, hungrier, always chasing the next deal, the next conquest. When Elena asked if he was overworking, he brushed her off with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Still, she tried to support him. She left her firm when he suggested she focus on smaller projects, claiming her career was distracting her from their marriage. She agreed, thinking it was temporary, that once he was stable, she could return to her dreams. She poured her energy into building a home, into being the steady anchor to his storm. Then came the pregnancy. When Elena discovered she was expecting, her heart swelled with hope. She imagined Adrian softening, returning to the man she once knew. She told him the news one quiet evening over dinner, her hands trembling with nervous joy. For a moment she saw the old Adrian in his eyes, surprised, emotional, almost tender. He hugged her, kissed her forehead, promised he would take care of her. But reality was different. As her belly grew, so did his distance. Instead of being more present, Adrian became colder, slipping further into the glittering world of investors, models, and endless parties. He wasn't cruel at first, just absent. But absence can be just as painful as betrayal. Elena spent lonely nights in their penthouse, her hand resting on her stomach, whispering promises to the child while wondering if Adrian would even be home for the birth. And then the betrayal became undeniable. She found a lipstick stain on his collar, a perfume that wasn't hers lingering on his jacket, late-night texts he guarded like secrets. Each time she asked, he gaslighted her, told her she was paranoid, hormonal, imagining things. She wanted to believe him. Oh, how desperately she wanted to believe him. But the truth was already carving cracks in her heart. When she finally caught him, truly caught him, walking into a restaurant with Sienna Cruz on his arm, smiling as if he had no wife at all, the world collapsed. Paparazzi captured the image before Elena even had the strength to turn away. The headline the next morning read, "Billionaire Kane and Mystery Woman Spark Romance Rumors." Mystery Woman, Mistress. Proof that Elena's fears had never been paranoia. The divorce followed swiftly, brutal in its coldness. Adrian's lawyers tried to strip her of dignity, claiming she deserved nothing, that she had contributed little to his empire. He didn't care that she carried his child. To him, she was an inconvenience, a problem to be erased. Yet Elena did not break. She signed the papers, packed her belongings, and walked away from the life she thought was hers. It wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the end of the girl who once believed love could conquer everything. Now she was a woman, a mother, and she would survive, even if it meant standing alone. She returned to architecture quietly, taking small projects under a different name, refusing to let gossip destroy her passion. She avoided parties, galas, the bright lights of the world Adrian now ruled. She lived simply, focusing on her baby, building strength in silence. But no matter how hard she tried, fate had its way of dragging her back into the storm. And that was how Elena Hart, 6 months pregnant and still healing from heartbreak, found herself standing in the very ballroom she once helped design, face to face with the man who betrayed her, and the mistress who replaced her. And when her legs gave way that night, when she collapsed beneath the weight of humiliation and pain, she never imagined who would come rushing to her side.